So I wanted to introduce my friend Olga to the. Initially, we were designed just for me to say some final remarks and to thank everyone, or to discuss something at Polsinelli. But I mentioned to Olga yesterday that I've had the pleasure of working with her a number of times and being on similar panels. And as a venture capital person, I wanted to kind of make sure she met Marty and tell us about your background. And in particular, there's one opportunity that she brought to me. I wanted her to give it a floor and the opportunity to discuss it some more. And I apologize, I didn't realize this would be the last event of the day. So hopefully some more people come back, but we'll get the information sent around and we can go from there. So give us your background and tell us about this one opportunity we were discussing. Very exciting.
Great. Thanks so much, Pete, and thanks so much, Marty, for hosting. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here. So happy to start with a bit of a background on myself. I've lived in the venture space for close to 2 decades. I've worked at a few different funds, including Insight Venture Partners. So Insight is a $90 billion growth stage fund here in New York City. I've also had the pleasure of having worked on the operator side of startups as well. So I was employee number 1 at a quantum computing startup called Rigetti Quantum Computing that actually just went public on NASDAQ in March. So very excited for the exit there and for having been there literally in the first 0 to 1 of the journey. And having been exposed to such a cool and novel deep tech industry. Since then, I've basically built out my own practice around supporting family offices in their venture investments. So I advise family offices on helping them build out their venture thesis, sourcing the right opportunities for them, conducting institutional quality due diligence on behalf of investors, and doing portfolio management work as well. So kind of soup to nuts venture, on-demand venture for family offices. I have had the pleasure of working with incredible clients. I would say my clients tend to fall into kind of 3 different categories. One is purely opportunistic investors, so folks that are looking for a financial return and to diversify their exposure away from real estate and the public equities markets. Number 2 is strategic investors, so folks that have an existing operating business and they're thinking about venture as either a potential M&A pipeline or some sort of a strategic angle to what they do. So for instance, I do quite a bit of work with a family office that comes out of biotech, so the largest vaccine manufacturer in the world. So basically with them, we're building out a portfolio of early stage therapeutics and medical device companies where they can add a tremendous amount of value in both on the product development side as well as opening doors on the distribution side globally. And then the last category of investors are impact investors. So there was a lot of talk at the previous panel around ESG. I personally think that it's much more difficult to take an existing massive ship and now tell them, oh, you have to follow certain ESG criteria. Yep. It's much easier to have that impact be baked into the DNA of companies. So these are early stage startups that are looking for double bottom line objectives, not just to be purely financially sustainable, but also have some sort of a world positive impact. And then I also have clients that look for triple bottom line companies. So these are companies that can not only be financially sustainable, have a positive impact, but also create kind of a case study for a much broader systemic change. So I'll give an example of one of our portfolio. So with one of my clients, we've built out a portfolio of 54 different companies. It's a pure play impact portfolio. And one of the companies is in the ed tech space. And this is an emergency student aid company. So basically the reason why one of the main reasons why students drop out, it's due to financial hardship. A lot of those students are underprivileged, have an underprivileged background, and the traditional financial aid process is very arduous and takes months. So this company basically is able to use alternative sources of data, such as their academic record and so on and so forth, to underwrite short-term loans that can get that student to continue to be enrolled, increasing the retention numbers for the universities. What this company has done is it's created a framework of doing this short-term student aid underwriting, and now it's being used as a case study to lobby the federal government to change their student aid policies nationwide. So this is something that we consider to be kind of a triple bottom line company that is able to shift and change inequities that are systemic. Yeah, very, very excited about some of the work that we're doing. And of course, I do think that family offices have an opportunity to fill some of the gaps and inequities that exist in traditional ventures. So they can be kind of provide more patient capital, they can provide catalytic capital and de-risk certain overlooked founder types for more traditional venture down the road. So again, pointing to the portfolio that we've built out for one of my long-term clients, the DEI, the diversity metrics that we have within that portfolio are 5 to 10x kind of industry averages. So very, very exciting there. So that's a little bit about my work. I also am just recently joined as a part-time partner in a sustainability-focused fund, so I'm doing quite a bit around finding early stage opportunities, so very much kind of science fiction stuff around energy transition, climate tech, kind of at the intersection of sustainability and energy, real estate and building materials. There was a question about building materials. You know, we've looked at some really cool companies that are using, for example, hemp reinforced concrete for construction that is much more sustainable. We look at transportation, logistics companies, consumer companies, and so on and so forth that have climate tech component, and we do have, again, a diversity lens within that vehicle. So we look for teams that have at least one senior team member who is either gender, racially, LGBTQ, veteran, neurally diverse. So we're promoting diverse teams within that particular vehicle. So, and then of course I advise startups. I'm a mentor in 6-7 different accelerator programs, so very deep in the venture space. And happy to answer any questions that folks may have around building out a venture strategy, around going about sourcing the right and diligencing the right opportunities. But I think Pete was very intrigued when I shared one particular deal with him. So right now I'm in the process of syndicating an SPV into a quantum computing spin out of Google X. So because of my background as an early employee at Rigetti Quantum Computing, I am very well connected within the quantum computing field. It's relatively small. And I know Jack Hittery, who's the CEO of that company. Jack is one of these incredible thought leaders in the quantum computing space. He's written the quantum computing book that is taught at universities. He also was the quantum evangelist at Google. So he had like a multi-million-dollar a year budget to travel all over the world and built out the quantum computing ecosystem. Because one of the biggest challenges in the industry today is, there's definitely a bottleneck around talent. There's only about 500 people around the world that are able to have the qualifications necessary to do this very, very cutting edge deep tech work. But the opportunity is super interesting. I'm happy to chat with anyone that has an interest in the space. It is a hardware agnostic software solution that is addressing what's called the SNDL threat. So basically there is a quantum arms race that's happening globally, with $23 billion being spent on quantum investments. And more than half of that is done by China. So China is outspending the entirety of the rest of the world combined.
Yeah.
And they're really, there's an arms race where China is really trying to compete with Russia and the United States to achieve quantum supremacy.
Let me jump in there for a second.
Yeah.
So the reason why I wanted Olga to speak today is because exactly all the reasons she mentioned. As I've mentioned in the introductions and yesterday, I'm not a venture person, I'm not an investment person. My background is as a patent attorney and last 25 years in innovation, and I've done a lot in the federal government. I've done a lot with the House, the Senate, the Patent Office, and all folks. You can appreciate a room of this size. Imagine I had a group of individuals come in before the pandemic from China discussing US-China innovation and trying to work together if possible, rather than be enemies. And we work with the US government and various people on trade policies and theft of IP. So when we work with DARPA, as I mentioned to you yesterday, I'm going to be doing more work in the future as a special government employee for DARPA. Quite frankly, I hope to introduce Olga to the DARPA team. And these are investments that the government has told me that they want to make, the United States wants to make. They don't want China and others. People in the business are well aware that China is outspending us, not only in this area, but in AI and many other areas that has raised a great concern from national security. When I met with different government officials, they said, Pete, quantum computing is the challenge because of it basically renders, and you can describe it better than me, encryption technology and all national security information basically worthless. And with all the biggest challenges, this morning we started with the representative from Ukraine speaking. What's going on in Ukraine is tragic, of course, and with Russia, but for those that have really focused on this, the FBI and many others, the long-term threat and the long-term concerns are really with China. And it's almost, I shouldn't say with Taiwan, of course, not if, but when things happen in Taiwan, there's just a lot of concerns on how we're going to deal with that. So we may not be in a physical war right now, but the technology war and everything that Olga is mentioning with this company and others is really, really critical from national security and the U.S. perspective. So that's more background on why I'm so excited. Now, there's also certain people named Eric Schmidt, and my number one to get in was Olga, but this guy Eric Schmidt that did some pretty amazing things at Google, involved in other things. So discuss that as much as you want.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up the RSA encryption. So obviously, RSA so anything digital that we use today, like VPN, the P and the VPN is the privacy piece. It's encrypted. Anything that we do today, whether it's email, making phone calls, everything is encrypted either through RSA or elliptical curve encryption. I mean, there are different protocols. RSA is the most commonly used. It's basically based off of a factoring problem that takes tens of years to solve, and that's why it's generally unhackable today. What's going to happen when quantum computing is going to come into its full force? RSA encryption is going to be hacked, easily hacked within under an hour, they're estimating. So, and that's why, as you mentioned, the RSA encryption is going to be rendered essentially obsolete. So what does that mean? That means that, well, a few things. Number one is, as I mentioned, there's a big threat called SNDL, so save now, decrypt later. There are bad actors today that are stealing encrypted information from both public and private sources. And even though they're not able to utilize it at this point in time, they understand that quantum is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And when it happens, they'll be able to have access to a tremendous amount of information. So as a result, the White House has pushed very, very significantly to transition all the federal agencies towards transitioning to what's called PQC, post-quantum cryptography. And it's a way to kind of it's an intermediary step to prepare for the post-quantum world and to avert some of these SNDL attacks. So this particular company that I'm syndicating called Sandbox, it was incubated within Google X, which is the moonshot factory of Google, now called Alphabet, for about 5 years. They've spun out 3 months ago in March, so this is technically a 3-month-old company. So they have kind of 3 main product groups, but one of the main products that they're offering is around this post-quantum cryptography. This is this main issue that's being addressed. And as mentioned, as recently as February of this year, there have been actually bipartisan efforts to, as I mentioned, transition not only the public sector as well as the private sector to post-quantum cryptography.
And that's what Sandbox does?
That's one of the solutions that they offer. They have 3 main product lines. So the post-quantum cryptography is one. They're also doing some work around quantum sensors, which have applications from everything from navigation systems to the biotech space, like disease detection and diagnostics. They also have solutions around quantum simulation. So when quantum is going to exist, and this is one of the applications that I'm super excited about, is when quantum is going to exist in its full-fledged form, we will be able to essentially do drug development. We'll be able to model every single atom in the universe and do drug development in a completely simulated environment. So it's going to shorten the drug development timeline significantly. And basically, Sandbox have secured contracts along all 3 of its kind of target product areas. They have secured contracts both with public agencies, private institutions, ranging from SoftBank and Vodafone to Mount Sinai Hospital Group. And then they also have secured significant contracts with value-added integrators such as Deloitte and Ernst & Young, which can help them, serve as a distribution gateway for accessing, all the Fortune 10,000 companies.
How much has Google invested in them?
That information is confidential.
Can't really invest if you don't know.
Is Sandbox?
Well, so Google is not on the cap table.
But they're a spin-out of Google. So Google
Yes.
must have spent
So
5 years of money.
Yes, but it's been booked as an R&D expense for Google, so they did not receive any equity into the company.
Right. So right. So it's non-dilutive.
It's non-dilutive, correct?
So what did Google invest in them? Like, okay, here's a different question. How many people worked on it over that 5-year period?
So again, as I mentioned, so I'll take a step back. Quantum computing is a matter of national security. So there's limited amount of information
I know
that's
Rotter. You know
okay.
Bradley Rotter?
No, I don't know.
So he was running the Quantum Computing Institute in Newport, Rhode Island.
Okay.
Working for DARPA.
Okay,
So,
great.
So he's a crypto billionaire. So he's a guy who's heavily involved in that stuff.
Okay, that's very nice.
So I'm just trying to understand,
Is Sandbox actually raising money at this point?
Yes. Yes. So
how much are you raising?
Okay. So Sandbox is in the process of raising their one and only capital funding that they need. The amount is $700 million. They are valuing themselves at $3.3 billion valuation pre-money, so $4 billion post. They are on target. As mentioned, this is like a 3-month-old company. They are on target to meet their revenue projections for 2022, which is $60 million. In fact, they might be upgrading that to about $100 million. The runway that the 700 million is getting them is to get to 1 billion in revenue in 5 years. When that happens, the company is going to IPO, assuming kind of favorable market conditions. Yeah, and that's kind of the high level about the deal.
Where's the company based?
The company is based in, well, it's a bit of a distributed team.
Right.
But the company is based in San Francisco.
I've got a question. I
Yes.
feel like that, should it be public?
That's a great question.
You can't really disclose like the revenue concentration per customer. They can't, I mean, they can't tell what the products are, who the customers are.
They can talk about the products and customers at a certain level. They obviously some of the DoD
Yeah,
contracts would be classified and would
thinking
not
of
be
Lockheed
information.
Martin and the other companies, Martin and Marietta, others that are they public? I think they
Yeah.
are, but I think Olga's right. Really, certain things will be public and others will have to, not be disclosed.
But they basically have one customer, right, in most cases.
Meaning the
Different
government.
Agencies of the US government.
Yeah.
They're not gonna sell it to
Exactly.
governments.
Yeah, this sandbox
I mean-
I'm sorry, go.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it makes me think of that company Relativity I mentioned yesterday, that this guy Tim Ellis, who looks like he's a very young gentleman, but came for a B round, raised $75 million, was valued at 400 million, and now they're valued at like 4 or 5, if not more, $10 billion, and launching rockets into outer space. So when many things I thought of when I saw the information that Olga provided, it just seems like it's a home run. But again, I'm not an investor. I'm not making advice. It just seemed like a home run.
Olga, have you
And-
had much traction with your other business consulting with venture capital funds? Have you had much traction with your venture capital funds regarding this raise?
Oh, so so the cap table is already full of venture capital funds.
Okay.
The SPV and the venture capital funds cannot invest into SPV. I've had a tremendous amount of traction within my family office network, within a lot of the different investor clubs and investor groups that I'm connected to. And in fact, last night and TBD by the end of the week, there have been requests to even increase my allocation that I currently have.
And you're trying to raise 700 million in the SPV?
No. The SPV is 15 million.
Oh, okay.
700 is the total raise. The majority of that is already closed out and spoken for.
Okay.
So is in.
And just NQTEL is on the cap table, so that's the venture capital arm of the CIA. We
Shield?
have, sorry,
Is Shield?
Shield?
No.
No, I'm not familiar with that, but so section 32 is on the cap table. That is ex-Google and ex-Google X people. We have everybody from T. Rowe Price to Guggenheim with their retail investors. You have a bunch of VCs like Parkway Venture Capital and Briar Capital. I can share more details, and a lot of it is actually publicly available. If you Google Sandbox, they've put out some press releases that list out the investors.
And I think I mentioned before, Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google,
Correct.
he's an personally invested. He's also chairman of the board, so obviously carries a lot of weight.
Yeah, and Mark Benioff is invested through his family office, Time Ventures. It's a long list in terms of the cap table. So and it's really through my personal relationship and having made some significant introductions for the CEO directly that I've been able to get a.
So for those
What's the name
family
of the company?
offices,
SandboxAQ.
so for those family offices that waited to the end of the day and are still on a Zoom, you can thank me later. So, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, that's kind of it. I mean, I'm happy to give an overview of the quantum computing space. Happy to chat about some of the other work that I do with family offices and venture investments.
I had a
Whatever.
couple of questions about your work in ESG.
Sure.
So I don't know if you know, do you know who George Friedman is? He founded Stratfor.
Okay. No, I don't.
You know what Stratfor is? They're a
Mm,
geopolitical
okay.
consultancy that is, so he's a PhD in mathematics, ex-CIA analyst, et cetera.
Okay.
So, and he's probably 70 something now, maybe he's 80. But he wrote a book and he's talking about his solution to the ESG problem was to put solar panels on the moon and to use radio waves to beam that all down to the earth. Do you know anything about that kind of stuff or any kind of progress on that? Because the problem with, so most people argue that solar panels are already at close to maximum efficiency because of atmosphere in the wall.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get much more. There's not much more bang for the buck investing in the technology. So his argument is that if you're in outer space and within atmosphere, that you get far better. You get 80-90% efficiency rather than the 45% target that they think is maximum efficiency.
Yeah, so I haven't heard about that project, and certainly we talked about the transmission issue, right? Like energy storage and transmission is like the biggest issue when it comes to alternative energy. And I was actually just like in Phoenix, Arizona recently for a Schmidt Futures event retreat, and I was shocked, you know, in a place where you have sun, you know, 365 days out of the year, like 100-degree weather. I saw only one building that had solar panels.
Well,
So I don't think we need to go to the moon. Like we can go,
Yeah.
we can
No,
look
no,
at
well, the
Arizona.
question
We
is
can
the
look at.
reality is the value of getting that changing the solar, getting better conversion rates, right? Rather than putting solar panels all around the earth, right? That you can just do it on the moon. Like China's actually building a facility right now. They have they're looking to put up a huge solar plant on the moon. That's what part of their mission was, to the other side of the moon, right? Is solar transmission via radio waves, which then power turbines when it hits the earth.
yeah, I haven't heard of that myself.
Yeah, I think George Friedman wrote 2 books, Next 10 Years,
Yeah.
which he wrote probably in 2008, where he kind of all of his predictions came through, and then the next 100 years, where many of his predictions have come true. So it's a pretty amazing book, because he predicted the wall. He predicted that, a lot of things.
Yeah,
He
I'll
kind
just
of predicted Trump.
complete side note on the transmission distribution side. As I mentioned before, I worked at Con Edison for 10 years in the transmission distribution system, and we bring power in outside of 345,000 volts. And if you look out the window or this side, we have the curtains drawn there, you don't see anything above ground. You have a whole nother city underground. Just a crazy thing. I remember you have 640 miles of high voltage, 345,000 volts that's actually in pipes so that we can cool it. And that's what it takes to power the city. So all this superconductivity, I think it's more out west, and we're one lane. Look at all the streets. Look at everything going on underneath the city. We've opened them up. There's some famous pictures of them. You have steam mains. You have everything: telephone lines, water mains, sewage lanes, everything. You're not going to get. It's going to be very challenging to get this future technology. You know,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
superconductivity. Yeah. So, but it's fascinating, and everything you read, the grid needs to be upgraded. They've been putting a lot of money into the grid for years. To me, it has to change from source needs to get closer to the user. In this,
Right, California wants to
Yeah.
invest $1 trillion over the long term in the grid because it needs it to convert
Yeah.
to solar.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, window technology, building materials that could generate power right there.
there you go. Right,
Yeah.
absolutely, right.
And we're spending probably less time on the energy side because it's so capital intensive from my fund. So we're much more interested in waste management and different circular systems that can be deployed that can help with the crisis around waste management. So for instance, like one of the most interesting startups I've seen last week was a company that's doing micro remediation. So actually coming from the founder comes from the construction space, and she was realizing that there's a lot of leftover material that just gets thrown away. And she created this system that basically takes waste from, it could be, roof shingles, concrete, astroturf, those kinds of materials that have been worn and left over, takes waste in, uses a certainly specifically trained mushroom strain that is able to transform it and turn it into kind of a spongy output material that can then be used as a shipping material, for example. So that's an example of something that could be deployed and she's running her first pilot with a company called Turquette, which is the largest manufacturer of astroturf. And she's deploying that solution on site, creating this kind of circular closed loop system. So I'm super excited about these types of solutions.
Wow. Any other questions?
What about geothermal? Have you looked into this? Because it's kind of an infinite energy source and non-polluting, could be deployed everywhere. You could retrofit the existing energy infrastructure of the planet, and it wouldn't involve any political tensions.
Yeah, so again, our fund is a very small $10 million vehicle. We can't handle these types of, these types of projects end up being more kind of like project finance kind of situations as opposed to venture. Absolutely supportive of all the efforts. I have a friend who's working on something similar in Canada. Canada is, I know, a big place for geothermal, but that's not something that.
Yeah,
I spend a lot of
geothermal,
time
we've
with.
looked at a lot over the years, and it's just like many energy generation sources, it's hard to scale. So if you look at Indian Point Nuclear Power Plant, that generates 1,000 megawatts, 1,000 million watts of power. And years ago, the system all of New York was 10,000 megawatts. So the thing with all these geothermal, you're opening up the ground, obviously, but it's just getting the scale. That's the issue. It's similar to solar power and wind power a little bit. You just got to put a lot of them around to get the benefits of it. Does that make sense?
And what if you go deeper? Then you have a higher temperature.
Yeah, I mean, all those, Olga just mentioned it, all very capital intensive, and you can only pop so many holes in the ground.
Is
So,
geothermal, is there methane involved in that or no?
not that I know of, as far as a release, no, I don't think so,
Okay.
yeah.
You just use water basically to extract the heat
Yeah.
from the core of your.
Yeah,
And it's
I'm not an
actually-
expert, I'm just saying what work we've done, you bring up a good point, but
Yes, so we
Thank you.
actually, with our family office, invested in a fund called Extantia out
Okay.
of Berlin, and they invested in a company called GA Drilling, which is does geothermal drilling. And they developed a new type of drilling technology, which kind of takes away this like cost prohibitive aspect of drilling. They use a plasma drill to pulverize the rock, and then you can just go as deep as you want without any wear and tear.
yeah.
And Gates Ventures also invested.
Great,
in the
great.
same company.
It sounds like it'd be a very good application for rural environments. When you start getting into the city and the urban environment, it's much more difficult, right? You just don't have the land. But I think what you're saying for especially rural or someone would be a really great application. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, you can do it everywhere. I mean, you can just drill down. Obviously, if there's tunnels, there's issues, but otherwise,
Yeah.
you can just deploy geothermal for like a single multi-apartment building and then make it energy independent.
Yeah, sounds good.
Very cool. Well, and I will say that, I mean, we invest primarily in the US, but Europe for sure is much more advanced around energy transition and green solutions.
Great.
Any more other questions? Well, that's it. Any parting thoughts that you want? Where do we find out more information about this, the deal that you have on quantum?
Please reach out. Pete has my information. I think Marty, you have my information.
Yeah.
I'm
Circulate it among
happy-
the group.
happy-
Yeah. And then anyone in
Share
particular information will connect you with Olga.
The first person is Bradley Rotter, who I thought you were already in quantum, but obviously
Yeah.
doesn't know Olga, so.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned, what was the company again? You mentioned the, yesterday, you mentioned today too, it's the venture capital arm of the CIA.
Incutel.
Which
Incutel.
is involved.
Yeah,
They're already
which is
involved, yeah.
Yeah. So,
And that's
I
a
gotta
really
check them out.
it's a really great strategic investor to have because they have a
Absolutely.
direct line into the DoD and
Yeah,
they,
no, I
100%
need to learn more
credibility.
about them as I do my new
they
gig.
were on the cap table of Rigetti as well.
Right, so
Yeah.
they've been speaking with our group for since 2005. So we
Exactly.
know
amazing.
Incutel really well.
Yeah,
Very good.
yeah,
And they have a whole perspective on ESG as well.
yeah.
So
Well,
more in alignment with George Friedman than what you've been hearing from other people
Oh, interesting.
speaking at
Maybe,
Yeah.
could you connect it to the quantum computing gentleman that you mentioned?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you and I are connected on LinkedIn.
Yes,
Just,
we are.
Yeah.
Send me a note, I'll connect you to Brad Rotter.
Sounds
Yeah,
good. Thank you.
Yeah.
CC me, I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that conversation, yeah.
Yeah,
He's done well,
he's
yeah.
a super smart guy.
Yeah,
But ex-West Point cadet.
Thank you for your service.
Sure.
yeah.
Great job.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thanks so
yeah.
much,
Thank
guys.
you, Olga.
Yeah.